Hi, leaders, and welcome to the Don't Lead Alone podcast. As the end of the year draws closer, we're likely having some tough conversations with our board of directors. Could be about finances, maybe program impact is down, staff morale is in a rocky place, and we have to talk about the overall health of our agency. It's really easy to share the good news, right? We got this big donation, and that's amazing. It's really helped us be sustainable this year. It is harder to share that bad news. And COVID aside, it's often difficult to know what exactly the board wants to know and how they want to learn about it. I'm going to touch base on this and more, so let's get started. So first, we're going to talk about how to communicate with our board members in preparation for a board meeting. There's lots of information that we try to cram into our executive reports, right? I highly encourage, though, for your executive report to be informative, but much less detailed. Much less detailed director reports. Think about an abstract, just a paragraph, a summary for each of your programs. And what if you got that abstract or summary down to like 3 sentences for each of the programs or services that you're reporting on? That would be an easy read, and board members around your organization, I was going to say around the world, but it's not really around the world, around your organization are going to love you for that. I'm also a big fan of dashboards. Visualization tools are a board member's best friend. There's types of dashboards that give you the current status and the current metrics, much like a quick flash of health, like when you go to the doctor. And other types of dashboards will allow you to compare over a chosen period of time. You could look at this month versus last month. You could look at this month versus the calendar year. You could look at this month versus the last 11 months. You could look at this time last year. There's just lots of ways that you can cut it. I would say, though, if you're considering looking at this year compared to last year, I would do a couple of years. 3 to 5 years is typically a good rule of thumb. If last year was an oddball year, or if this year is an oddball year, having a couple of other, say, Novembers, having a couple other Novembers is really going to show you what the trend is. We're right on par, a little low, a little high, or it's just kind of wonky right now. Also, when we're talking about preparation and communication, send your materials at least a week ahead of time. If you're one of those boards that meet less frequently, let's say quarterly, maybe give them a little bit more time. There's probably more material you're going to want them to read. And either way, I would encourage you to consider a board management system. It doesn't have to be one of those fancy kinds that you see advertised or you have to pay buku's amount of dollars for. Something like a Google Drive folder or a Dropbox, things like that is going to save your team so much time going back and forth. Your board members are going to be able to access it at any time. So as you're preparing materials, they can see that. As you talk about how policies have changed over a period of time, they can look back historically to see what others may have looked like. They can look back at meeting minutes on their own. It just is a really nice way to keep everybody on the same page. It will also save you and whoever communicates with your board a lot of time finding documents to resend. I know I've had it, and you probably have too, and a board member gets there and they're just like, what? I didn't see that in the email, or I printed everything, but I guess it didn't print that, those types of things. If it's all in this folder, then everyone's on the same page about what exactly was there and can access it again at any time. We're going to transition now a little bit to talk about what boards even want to know. What are you putting in this report? How are you preparing your agenda? There are a few different models of dissemination, and a lot of them are really good, but one of my favorites is the 3 buckets. Bucket number 1 is external risks and opportunities. Bucket number 2 is internal challenges. And bucket number 3 is successes. I really like this structure because it mirrors your strategic plan discussions, especially when you think about SWOT. That's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. If you can actively be having this kind of conversation throughout the year, strategic planning process stops becoming so intimidating. Whether you're a board member who has been through terrible strategic planning processes, maybe you're a green board member and the thought of it just makes you clammy. And honestly, less pressure for your executive team because you're talking about the risks, opportunities, challenges, successes. You're talking about SWOT as you go. You don't have to suddenly go looking and deep dive into them. All the information for you is already there. All right, so that aside, bucket number 1 was external risks and opportunities. What does that mean? External risks might be something like COVID. This is something you had no control over. You didn't predict. Sometimes you can predict external risks, but sometimes you can't. So external risks might be something like COVID. It might be the closure of a significant employer in your area, right? So that either means people are going to move away, people are going to be in additional poverty, and you need to beef things up. Things like that. It might be that there is a change in your transit system. So maybe people are having more trouble accessing your services because the buses aren't running as frequently. Be prepared to share when you're sharing these external risks. Be prepared to share how you plan to mitigate how risky and damaging they are going to be to your organization. External opportunities sometimes are a little bit easier to talk about and a little bit easier to pick out. Maybe you have a new business coming to town and they're looking to fund something like your service. Maybe the transit system is adding routes. So now more people are going to be able to access your services. These could be really great. The second bucket was internal challenges. Internal challenges can be person or non-person. So person would be staff. Mostly person is staff, right? Non-person, non-human would be things like finances, program viability, sustainability of benefits, things in that nature. And successes, obviously, are so much more fun to talk about. I encourage you to end your discussions with these successes. So things that just were above and beyond. So maybe it was a testimonial. Maybe it was a staffer who went above and beyond. Maybe you have a new partner who has been able to provide something in kind or financially in a really big way that wasn't expected. So you can take all of this and use it to inform how you write these executive reports. I would challenge you to keep your reports to 2 pages. You heard me right. Keep it to 2 pages. And that doesn't have to include your graphics. Your graphics can take up their own page if you really want to get technical about it. But if you are going to go longer, they have to stay less than 5. And hear me out on this. Your board has approximately 1 week to go about their daily life, their daily job, their families, and then look over your finances, look over your policy to review and give you decent feedback. They do not need an excessive director's report. You don't have to put all the details in there. You don't have to outline a conversation. If they need these additional details, they can ask you at the meeting. You can have a discussion. If you need to supply supplemental information later, you can do that as a follow-up, as an addendum. There's lots of different options down the road. You need to make sure that your report is something that they are going to read, and not only read, but digest, right? They need to see it, read it, and they have to be able to actually make sense out of it, to use this document to help them make an informed decision. So informative, but less detail. And while we've circled back to communicating with your board, I want to end with some of these thoughts on communication. So the natural chain of command would indicate that the executive director is the one that primarily interacts with the board, right? There's a few exceptions, of course, but the ED is the interactor. That is the go-between the board and the organization is the ED. It's really typical, it's common for the ED to communicate extra with the board president or board chair and perhaps touch base with the other lead board members of a committee. So the finance committee, she's probably talking with the treasurer a little bit more. If there's a policy meeting, she's talking to that lead director a little bit more. If you are a board member, I'm sorry, I skipped ahead. It's typical for the executive director to communicate extra with the president chair or the board member leading a committee. What you don't want is for the staff to go around the executive director. If you are a board member and you see this happening, you need to ask some serious questions to yourself on why this might be happening. I want you to think about it a little bit first. See what you notice, see what patterns you're picking up. And then I want you to talk to your other board members about it. They need to know that this happened. They need to know that something might be going on. Right? This is your organization to govern, and you need to know that something isn't quite right now. After the rest of the board members know about it, you do need to tell the ED, the staff person is their staff person, to deal with consequences and conversations and learning, etc. on their own. So you do need to tell the ED and let them take care of the rest of the situation. If you are the executive director and you see this happening, you also need to ask yourself some serious questions on why a staff person is jumping over you to talk to board members about a situation, a policy, or something like that. You need to address it directly with that staff person. You need to acknowledge to the board that that happened and it wasn't okay. If you need any advice on how to have a hard conversation like this, our episode 4 of our podcast covered it. There's another thing that I want you to be aware of when we're talking about the board and communication, and that is you don't want the ED to have one-on-ones with the various board members. The executive director has one-on-one with their staff people. They do check-ins, they do supervision, all of these things. They do that with their staff people. The board is not, or the executive director is not a supervisor to your board members. Your board member is the executive director's boss. They are the supervisors. We actually see this kind of flip-flop happen quite a bit in smaller agencies and community-based ones or rural communities. They tend to have people who are more informal about the board process, and it's understandable to a point, but your role, regardless of where your agency is located and the type of culture that you want to have in your agency, is that the governance and executive chain, the organizational chart, is set up in a certain way, and it's set up in a certain way for a reason. When you have the executive director having one-on-ones on a regular basis with the board members, this can be very toxic to the organization as a whole, and it can be very dangerous to your viability as a nonprofit. You are flirting with founder syndrome. You are flirting with a couple of other things that are really unique to these situations. And I discuss this on a one-on-one basis with these organizations to help them see why these patterns have not been healthy for their growth. Oh, I'm sorry, I just kicked the camera. If you have any additional questions on communicating with board members, please let me know. If you need any help picking out some board management tools, let me know. I am excited to hear how your boards are doing, how you're growing and interacting with each other. If everything is healthy and good and operating the way that it should, your board should be a thriving piece of your organization. And then your organization will thrive too. All right, with that, we'll talk to you all later. Have a good one.